Story 1. I lived in a desert most of my life, so I had no experience with snow. Before my recent trip, I had spent maybe 5 days total in snow, and that snow had been very light. Because of that, I always pictured snow as eternally white and ethereal, like in the cartoons I watched as a kid. I went to spend time with my partner's family in the Midwest in early February. I was absolutely enchanted on my first day of the 2-week visit. Then I watched what happened as the snow stayed around, and I saw black ice and nasty gray-brown snowbanks at the side of the road. I suppose I should have known that snow gets dirty and tracked over, but I did not. It robbed my childhood wonder and whimsy right from under my nose. Story 2. I was baking a cake in my dorm for my 19th birthday. My friends were running around and being loud, so I yelled at them to stop because I did not want them to ruin the cake. They looked at me like I had two heads, so I explained that my siblings and I had always been taught that making loud noises or running around a kitchen while something was baking would make it fall. It turned out that rule was made up to keep kids quiet while baking. I called my mom, and she and my grandma were as surprised as I was to learn it as a myth. Apparently, at least 3 generations had believed and followed that rule. Story 3. My mother used to feed me dark green lettuce in salads. I loved it even when I was a kid. When I was 17, a friend came over for dinner and I asked my mother for seconds of dark green lettuce. My friend looked at me as if I were an idiot and said, you mean spinach? My mother had been fooling me my whole life. Story 4. Not me. In college, my buddy asked how to spell "smorning" because his phone did not recognize it as a word. He then said, like this morning. I asked, do you mean this morning? Story 5. One day I had a light bulb moment. Pickling is a process. You can pickle anything. So what are pickles? I was going to blow many minds with that question. Turned out they were cucumbers. Everyone knew that except me. Story 6. I thought robins came out of hibernation at Christmas because that is when you see them on cards and other decorations in the UK. I did not realize for a very long time that you actually see them all year like other birds. Story 7. I was in my mid-30s before I realized that the turn your head part of turn your head and cough was so you would not cough on the damn doctor. I always thought it must have flexed some particular muscle or something. To my credit, I am a man and I do not think I have ever had to do that. Story 8. Not me, but my father once stole into the woods during a family camping trip and put marshmallows on a bush, so it looked like they grew on it. My sister made it to post-secondary horticulture before she wised up. Story 9. I always thought the phrase "the coast is clear" was "the ghost is clear," meaning transparent. Story 10. My great-grandfather was missing half of the pinky on his left hand and always said it was because he liked to use it to sop up leftover pancake syrup, which he had worn down to a nub. This made sense to me because I'd seen him do that plenty of times. I was embarrassed that I had believed it until I was in college, but then I realized how ridiculous that was and finally asked him what had really happened. In reality, he and my uncle had been working in their blacksmith shop when my uncle accidentally brought a sledgehammer down on his pinky. He had not wanted to traumatize me as a child, but by the time I asked, I was old enough to handle the truth. Story 11. As a kid, I used to think the black market was an actual place like a bazaar where all the criminals regularly met. Story 12. When I was 4 or 5, my mother brought me home a balloon one day. It was a plain blue helium balloon. I accidentally let it go and it flew away. As a child, I was devastated. Later that night, she came back from somewhere and told me she had been at the gas station when, miraculously, my balloon came floating by. I was thrilled and believed her. Fast forward more than 20 years. I was on a date. We stopped for gas and saw a balloon floating near the gas station. I probably had not thought of that story in all that time. I started telling my date how my balloon had flown away and how my mother had found the very same one at a gas station. As I said it out loud, I realized, too late to avoid sounding foolish, that of course it had not been the same balloon. I had never seen anyone laugh so hard. Story 13. I didn't realize the handicap sign was a person in a wheelchair for a long time. I had always thought it was just a neat little symbol, kind of like a treble clef. Story 14. I truly believed for the longest time that hair grew from the ends of the strands rather than from the scalp. When I was 13, I asked a friend who had dyed her hair what she was going to do when it grew out and her natural color returned. I did not hear the end of it. My mistake still pains me to this day. Story 15. That Alaska is not an island with a weirdly straight border. Story 16. For years I removed toast from the toaster by sticking a butter knife in and picking it out. I did not learn that metal in a toaster is dangerous until I was 20, when my girlfriend freaked out. I guess I had been pretty lucky. Story 17. I thought until the age of about 21 that when companies had established next to their name, it meant they were estimated to have been started around that time. It was only when I voiced my disgust to my then partner that it was ridiculous nobody knew when these companies were formed and why they were all listed as established. She stared at me blankly for a moment and said, "Established." The penny finally dropped. Story 18. I was 23 when I learned I was allergic to apples. Someone complained that their throat was closing up after smoking, and I said, "Oh yeah, like when you eat an apple." You can imagine how the conversation went from there. Story 19. That little thing that dangles at the back of your throat is not your tonsils. Story 20. A few years ago, while searching for classical pieces on Spotify, I got frustrated that every version of works by composers such as Beethoven and Bach was performed by modern orchestras. I was naively looking for original recordings from the 18th century until I realized how silly that was. Story 21. It depends what you consider a child. In my mid-20s, I moved up the food chain from server to bartender at the restaurant where I worked. Someone ordered a Roman Coke. I did not know what a Roman Coke was, so I told him I would find out. I discovered that what I had thought was a Roman Coke my whole drinking life was in fact a rum and Coke, which I knew how to make. Story 22. A friend of mine did not learn until college that Martin Luther and Martin Luther King Jr. were not the same person. Story 23. I'm from Pennsylvania. When they do the nightly lottery drawings on television, they always add a reminder at the end. Benefits older Pennsylvanians every day. So naturally, I assumed that a lot of elderly people won the lottery. When I was a teen, I joked to my dad about him turning 50 and having a better shot at winning the lottery, and he looked at me like I was nuts. It turns out that benefits older Pennsylvanians every day means the lottery is a fundraiser for senior services, and there I was thinking it meant my grandmother was winning millions on her scratch-offs. Story 24. My mother used to tell me the car would not start unless the seatbelts were buckled. I did not know that was not a real feature until I was 22. Story 25. My 31-year-old girlfriend thought islands do not touch the bottom of the ocean. Story 26. Do not add dish soap to the dishwasher. I learned that at age 26. I grew up washing dishes by hand and had to clean up the mess. Story 27. Space heaters are called that because they heat a room, not because they resemble futuristic devices from outer space. Story 28. I went to Lowe's and, in front of everyone, asked for strap-ons. The correct word I was looking for was ratchets and tie-downs. Story 29. It took me an embarrassingly long time before I realized that when a movie had a blurb from Rolling Stone, it was not the Rolling Stones reviewing it. Story 30. My cousin's name is Victoria. Growing up, we always called her Tori. A couple of years ago, when I was in my 20s, she visited and we went to a restaurant. Our waitress introduced herself as Victoria, and my cousin said that was her name too. I was surprised because I had never realized that Tori was short for Victoria. Story 31. I thought the former leader of North Korea was Kim Jong-il for an embarrassingly long time. I somehow managed to avoid hearing his name spoken or seeing it written in a serif font. Story 32. My mother told me that if you swallowed gum, it would stick to your ribs. I was in my second year of college in an anatomy class when it struck me that this is not true. Story 33. My roommate was 21 when he learned that cows have hair. He thought they were just skin. Yes, technically cows have hair, not fur. Thank you for the laughs and the awards. This blew up, and my roommate is not talking to me. Story 34. I incorrectly said the briszt of it instead of the gist of it. I had used that phrase in conversation for years until, when I was nearly 30, a Jehovah's Witness came to my door and asked if I had ever read the Bible. I smugly replied, I got the briszt of it. Story 35. Reindeer are real animals. When I found out about Father Christmas, I thought that meant reindeer were not real. I was an adult and was confused and excited to see one in real life. Story 36. In college, I had a tough time trying to convince a friend that yellow dandelion flowers were the same as the white puffballs. I had to find a plant that had both stages coming from the same base. Dandelion time lapse. Story 37. I did not realize that woodchucks and groundhogs are the same animal. I was in my 30s. My state called them woodchucks, so I never made the connection when I was younger. Thank you for the awards and the fun comments. I did not expect this to blow up like it did. Story 38. I thought an axolotl was a fantasy creature that did not exist. You cannot blame me. Just look at a picture of one and tell me that does not look like something from a fantasy movie. Story 39. I was only able to see the capital D in the Disney logo a few months ago. I always wondered why it was a backwards G. I am 29 years old. Not my brightest moment. Story 40. Age 22. Kiwis aren't supposed to taste spicy. Turns out I was just allergic. I thought for the longest time that was why people liked them. Story 41. When I was young, I found a Doobie Brothers compact disc at a relative's house. I asked my mom what a doobie was. She said it was a woman's private part and told me never to say it. I was 17 before I heard someone call a joint a doobie. Story 42. I learned that jackalopes are not real. They are creations of taxidermists and folklore. I was absolutely mind-blown and Scooby-Doo betrayed my childhood. Story 43. My granddad played this epic, decades-long practical joke on me. Every Christmas for as long as I remember, he would put on Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds, but only the first disc, and call it a tradition. He played the compact disc every year, whether we were at his house or he came to ours. At Christmas 2020, when I spent the holiday without seeing any family due to coronavirus disease 2019 restrictions where I live, I asked my housemate, "Do you want me to go put on War of the Worlds now, or later?" My housemate looked at me, perplexed. What? War of the Worlds. My granddad insisted it was a tradition. Only your granddad does that. I told my granddad over a video call on Boxing Day. I had never heard the old man laugh so hard. Story 44. I grew up on a small farm. We had cows, chickens, pigs, rabbits, goats, and more. Occasionally we had to shear the goats. They would hold perfectly still like statues. I saw this regularly. When my parents took me to get a haircut, they told the barber to give me a billy goat cut. To me this meant hold very still, so I did. I had the same barber for a long time. He eventually passed away when I was in high school, and I had to find a new barber. Imagine the surprise of the new barber and me when he asked how I wanted it cut. And I said, "I just want a normal billy goat cut." This is one of those things that still makes me cringe at night. Story 45. There's no chemical in the pool that reveals when someone urinates. A buddy and I were talking about it and we realized neither of us had actually seen such a thing. We looked it up and felt pretty dumb. Edit. Yes, I know chlorine combined with urine creates that pool smell. That's not what I mean. I'm referring to the mythical chemical that supposedly changes color when someone urinates in the pool and identifies who did it. It doesn't exist. It's something adults tell kids to scare them out of urinating in the pool. Story 46. A friend of mine said his mother always left an extra inch in his shoes for his feet to grow when he was a child. In his 20s, while trying on new shoes, he asked the salesperson if there was room at the toe. The salesperson looked at him as if something absurd were growing out of his forehead and said, "You do not need room. You are done growing." Oof. Story 47. I am from a northern city in the United States. In basic training for the Army, the chow hall attendant asked if I wanted grits with my eggs and bacon at breakfast. I had never heard of them. I had lived a relatively sheltered, somewhat ethnically focused diet. I asked what they were, and she replied, "Well, they are just grits." I asked as politely as I could whether they were an animal, a mineral, or a vegetable. A new friend from Florida behind me heard the whole conversation and said, "They are just corn, somewhere between creamed corn and cornmeal." He added that if you put butter and salt on them, they taste like butter and salt. I love that guy. D is probably a general now. Story 48. I was probably in my 30s when I realized that putting your head in an oven kills you because of the gas, not just from burns. My brother is 30, has 2 children and a career, and cannot tell the time on a standard watch with hour and minute hands. Story 49. I thought that when you ate, all the food piled up from your feet and then, when it reached your butt, you pooped. I have no clue where that idea came from, but I believed it far longer than I should have. Story 50. A pony is not a baby horse. I am 47 and learned that less than 10 years ago. Story 51. I did not realize that Apollo 13 was an actual event and not just a movie starring Tom Hanks. It would have been embarrassing in any context, but especially so when I was working with Captain James Lovell and asked him why he was signing new paperback copies of Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks on the cover. "Oh, did you work on that movie?" I asked. Beyond awkward. We had an hour's drive together, and after he patiently explained that he had been on that mission and I admitted I had not seen the movie, I asked if he would tell me the story. He laughed and agreed. "Okay. I've never met anyone who didn't think they already knew the story," he said. Hearing him tell, it was riveting and special. 25 years later, I still cringe, but it was one of the best days of my life. He is truly an amazing person. I keep meaning to write it all and send it to the moth. There is a lot more to the story, most of which makes me look worse and him better. It took me another decade to appreciate the deeper lesson he offered me that day. Slow down. Life teaches you how to live and how to love. Story 52. Coral is an animal. I always thought it was an undersea plant. Story 53. My grandma always made me eat the crust of my bread because it had the most nutrients. In college, when I told my younger cousin that in front of my grandma, she laughed and said she only told me that so I would not waste the crust. Similarly, people warned that if you switched the lights on and off too fast, you would start a fire. Once I became a parent, I realized it is just a way to stop kids from being annoying. Story 54. When I was 40, I discovered that segue and segue are different words. Story 55. One of my friends from my master's program, graduate school, did not know that chickens have males and females. He thought roosters and hens were different breeds. The same applied to cows. He said he disliked cheese because he thought cow's milk was cow urine. We had to explain that urine is not stored in the udders and asked what he thought happened when human mothers breastfeed newborns. Urine is not stored in the breasts. We were 24 at the time. Tim, if you are reading this, you were much smarter than I was at neuro-ophthalmology, laughing out loud. Update. I cannot believe my most awarded comment is about cow urine. Thanks for the gold and silver, everyone, and thanks, Tim. Sorry they roasted you. Laughing out loud. Story 56. When I was at a cigar store, I noticed they had fuzzy pipe cleaners. I asked the man what they were for, and he said they were used to clean pipes. I had always associated them with arts and crafts in elementary school and never realized their purpose. Story 57. It only recently occurred to me in my 5th decade that "watch where you're going" means look in the direction you are walking and is not just something to say to someone who bumps into you. Story 58. At my first real job, my colleague told me we printed invoices in green. Later that week, I needed to print my first invoice and realized I had no idea how my colleague made invoices green. There was nobody to ask, so I changed the document background to green. The next day, my colleague laughed loudly and told me to just use green paper instead. Story 59. Roadrunners. I was 40 before I learned they exist in real life. They are also known as chaparral birds. I thought the family I was visiting was pulling my leg. Now, whenever the kids see me, they yell, "Beep, beep." Story 60. I grew up in a family of punsters and did not realize why it was called the funny bone until my mid-20s. I just thought it was because when you hit it, your arm feels funny, rather than understanding the pun between the words humorous and humorous. Story 61. I was well into my teens before I realized I was circumcised. Until that moment, I had felt so bad for all the Jewish boys who had their foreskins removed. Story 62. My mom used to tell me that putting too much vinegar on my chips would make my blood dry up, so I avoided it. I am 25 now and have just realized she wanted me to save everything because she was a single mother in a lot of debt. Story 63. I had my certified public accountant license before I realized pickles are actually cucumbers. Story 64. These things are not supposed to make your tongue and throat swell or make you overheat or sweat. I discovered I was allergic to the following: mint, tomato sauce, salt and vinegar chips, mild spice. Sweating can be normal, but you should still be able to breathe and not swell up. Others. I found out about most of these by asking friends how they deal with things like tomato sauce causing sweating. Story 65. The song I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus is not about creepy infidelity but rather hinges on the fact that fathers sometimes dress up as Santa, which I realized in my 20s when I mentioned it to my Catholic roommate. I am Jewish, and there is no pretense about who gives you a pair of socks on the 8th night of Hanukkah. Story 66. I had a friend who, at 25, found out that pepperoni was not a vegetable. He ordered a meat lover supreme. The waitress was surprised and amused when she responded to his question about why pepperoni was on a meat-only pizza. Story 67. I'm over 60, and I found out about a year ago that Zoe is pronounced Z-O-H-E. I always thought that was Zoe, the diminutive, and that Zoe was pronounced Z-O-H. To be fair, I cannot remember ever meeting anyone with that name. Story 68. Once when I was 17, I was losing my mind trying to find cupcake mix in the baking aisle, only to realize that cupcakes are just small cakes. Story 69. No, a scientist doesn't actually know everything about every subject in school. I used to think they were the masters of the world, knowing everything humanity had ever learned. I also thought you had to be a scientist to be president, but I was wrong. Story 70. I told my 60-year-old aunt that cats and dogs cannot interbreed to create a hybrid cat-dog. She didn't believe me at first, so I pointed out that there would be many half-people, half-sheep running around if that were true. Story 71. Okay, here goes. I am almost a senior citizen, but a couple of weeks ago I learned they actually laid a telegraph cable across the Atlantic. I was in tears when my husband told me, because I thought he was joking. I said no, they didn't. That's impossible. He was not joking. Cable was indeed laid between the continents, and I was upset because I was never taught that in school. Story 72. That frontage road is not a street name but a type of road. I had just remarked that there was another street named Frontage Road in front of my then-boyfriend. Story 73. I have been using the phrase, play it by ear, for 30 years. Story 74. The eggs we cook will never become baby chicks because they are unfertilized. Story 75. I recently learned that narwhals are not mythical creatures. As a child, I learned that unicorns are not real, so I spent my entire life thinking that if a horse with a horn is not real, then neither is a whale with a horn. How can we have whales with horns and not horses with horns? Still baffles me. I was told it is not a horn but a tusk, and that the tusk is basically a very long tooth. That is freaky, and I am not into it. Story 76. I was 21 years old and never paid much attention to the National Collegiate Athletic Association tournament. Guys around me kept saying the University of Connecticut would win the tournament and that they were unstoppable. I always wondered how Alaska could have such a great basketball team. Then one day I saw a tournament bracket and realized they meant the University of Connecticut. Story 77. Not really a fact, but something a child would understand that took me a long time to get. Ever since I can remember, my mom would rub the top of my head and we would have this conversation. Mom, what's this? Me, I don't know. What? Mom, it's a brain sucker. What's it doing? Me, what? I giggled. Mom, starving. I would beg her to do it often in front of people because even though I did not get the joke, I loved a good head scratch. It was not until my 20s that I realized my mom was calling me dumb. I am in my mid-30s now and I still ask her to do it because I am a sucker for a good head scratch. Story 78. The little pig going wee all the way home was squealing, not peeing. I was in my 20s before I heard someone say it while squealing it, and I made a shocked Pikachu face. Story 79. I did not grow up in a good household, so keep that in mind. I did not know how to tie my shoes until around age 13. I learned what vaginas and penises are in sex education when I was 14. I learned how to bathe myself properly at 15. I learned what condoms were at 16 because my southern school taught abstinence in sex education. I also learned what masturbation was that year. My husband taught me how to brush my teeth correctly at 20. I am learning slowly. Story 80. My spouse learned yesterday that wood floats on water. Our sink was full of water. A wooden spoon was floating, and she was staring at it. I said, "What?" She said, "It's floating." I said, "It's made of wood." She said, "What the heck? Really?" Story 81. My grandpa used to take me fishing a lot as a child. He explained that any noise at all would scare the fish in the lake and ruin fishing for everyone there for hours. On a boat with my husband last month, at the age of 28, I realized Grandpa just wanted some peace and quiet. Some people said you really cannot make noise, so I will explain. My husband turned on the radio while we were out fishing. When I complained, he said, "Oh, honey, Grandpa just wanted you to shut up." We caught lots of fish and made all the ruckus we wanted. Story 82. I didn't know that Shaq and Shaquille O'Neal were the same person. Story 83. It is much easier to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich when you put the peanut butter on one slice of bread and the jelly on the other, then press them together. I did not like peanut butter, so I did not make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches often until I had children. I hated making them until my husband made one in front of me. I will never live that down. Story 84. I mistook tree hugger for cheeseburger, so whenever it was said in a movie I would laugh, thinking the character had just been called that. Story 85. I thought graham crackers were pronounced Gramham, so now that is how I say it. I also recently found out reindeer are real. Story 86. My mom used to tell me that accidentally biting my tongue or cheek was a sign that I was overly tired. I believed that until I was 15 or 16. Turned out she was just trying to get me to go to bed earlier. Story 87. I was about 6 years old in the late 1960s and early 1970s and watched the evening news. They reported on the guerrilla war in Vietnam, and for several years I thought we were fighting actual guerrillas. Story 88. I did not realize that bitter and sour were different until a friend told me. I think I was 20 or so when I found out. Weird. Story 89. I thought you were not allowed to drive with the overhead cabin lights on until about 2 years ago. My mom did not want me to turn them on when I was a kid. They were not actually blinding the people behind us at all. Story 90. Pineapples grow the way they do, rather than like bananas. Story 91. I am an American living in Japan. The children I used to teach thought the blonde hair on my arms was made of gold and told me I could cut it off and sell it. A 30-year-old woman asked whether my blue eyes made me see the world with a blue tint. Story 92. I learned at age 27 that you can place a shower curtain inside the bathtub while showering to keep the bathroom floor dry. Shower curtains may seem obvious if you grew up with them, but if you did not, they are not always easy to figure out. I felt better after reading others' comments about shared memories. Story 93. I never understood where the saying "you know what assuming does. It makes an ass out of you and me" came from for most of my life. Then I realized that if you split the word assume, it becomes ass, you, me. Edit. A random, ill-considered comment on AskReddit with multiple spelling errors earned my first 1,000 upvotes. Sounds about right. Story 94. This is one of the most fun threads I have read on Reddit. Story 95. When I was 8, we got a dog. I was confused why everyone called her a girl because I thought dogs were boys and cats were girls. Someone later told me otherwise. Story 96. I thought Portugal was right next to Brazil, even though it colonized and reached it by sailing. Story 97. I spent 4 years in the military and got out before I discovered that the White House and the Capitol are two different buildings in the United States. Story 98. I believed women peed out of their butts until I was 16. I'm pretty sure someone told me that when I was a child, and I never questioned it. I remember the Tourette's character from South Park shouting, "Piss coming from my asses," and I actually believed that happened to women. Story 99. I was well into my 20s when I discovered that the old bedtime saying, Don't let the bedbugs bite, referred to an actual bug. I honestly thought it was just a saying until I moved into an apartment complex where people moved in and out constantly and brought those pests in. Story 100. I thought the Arctic was a landmass like all the other continents until this year. No one explained it to me, and they probably felt they did not have to. Story 101. Mince pies of the Christmas variety do not contain meat. Story 102. Okay, this is mortifying, but 7 hours in it probably will not gain much traction. I was 45 years old when I realized you could just pull the crotch of a one-piece swimsuit sideways and not drag the whole thing down and up. I still cannot believe I have been doing this wrong for years. Story 103. Soft drinks are called soft to distinguish them from beverages that contain hard alcohol. I figured it out when I was 28. Story 104. I was in college when I learned that women have a urethra that is not inside their vagina. I thought it was just one multifunctional hole. I was a biology major. Story 105. I found out a few months ago that foxes aren't cats. It had never occurred to me to say this much about it, but my friends thought it was hilarious when I tried to defend myself. Story 106. Why are there no 10 birthday candles in stores? I was complaining about it to my husband and he said, "You are supposed to put 1 and 0 together." That was the lowest point of my entire life. Edit. Apparently some of you do not understand. First, I was in the store with my husband when I saw some candles. I was not looking for wedding candles and I was not 10 years old. Second, I understand there may be candles that are a combined 1 and 0 or other variations. I was merely saying I had not seen one before. Third, it was a simple mistake I have only thought about a few times. I am not forming my entire personality around this one fact. To those who were civil and playful, thanks. You all are really funny. Story 107. I thought the Star-Spangled Banner started off as Jose. Can you see? When I was younger, it took going to my first Major League Baseball game as a young adult to realize that I was wrong. Story 108. The saying is shoulder width apart, not shoulder width apart. I knew it meant standing with your feet under your shoulders, but apparently I heard it wrong. Story 109. I am frantically scrolling through this thread to see if I think any of these are relevant. Story 110. I'm 39 years old. I just tried a Boston baked bean candy for the first time. It was surprisingly good. I had no idea it was a candy-coated peanut. Story 111. I was in college when I learned that Alaska is not an island. I had thought that because maps of the United States often showed the continental United States and Alaska separated, with Alaska placed at the top like an island and Hawaii at the bottom like an island. I am American. Edited to add, thank you for the award, the only one I have ever received for sheer stupidity. Story 112. Dill is an herb commonly added to pickles. I used to think dill pickles were a separate type, but dill is simply the herb added to them. Story 113. I did not know until my late 20s that people remove the bologna casing that covers the outer edge. I guess I never noticed and kept eating it that way until a friend saw me. Story 114. Joseph is not God. I did not have any religious education. I knew that Jesus was the Son of God and that he was also the son of Joseph. So, by transitivity, it seemed natural to me that Joseph was God. I only found out in my 20s. It is a good thing religion is not a big thing here. Story 115. I asked if ducks could fly. I was 26, and I think my husband regrets marrying me a little. Story 116. Someone I know recently learned that the word epitome is not pronounced epi-tome. The wife of a friend was in her 30s when she learned that Chihuahua is not pronounced Chahuahua. Story 117. Probably way too late to the party, but tax brackets matter. I am 30 and did not find out until last year that you are only taxed on the amount within each bracket. Seriously, I feel like more people need to know this. Story 118. I was well into my 30s when I realized that smoking a bowl did not involve an actual bowl like a cereal bowl. I am not saying the scene from Crocodile Dundee was entirely responsible for my misunderstanding, but it did involve drug use and a literal bowl, and I had seen the movie before I would have heard the term for the first time. Story 119. The sun is the only star in our solar system. I learned that in 5th grade science at age 44. Story 120. The teddy bears were not caught dancing in their underwear. In fact, they danced unaware. Story 121. My boyfriend and I attended different colleges. 8 years ago, during his first spring semester, I came to visit. We are almost 27 now. He excitedly brought me over to the new bushes they had planted. I looked at him in confusion and said they looked like the same bushes I had seen before. Then he proudly pointed out that these had flowers. I said, "Oh baby, it's just spring." He also did not realize that cupcakes are just small cakes or that pickles are cucumbers for an adorably long time. He is very smart but terrible at paying attention, so he has discoveries frequently and is great about laughing at himself, which makes it fun for everyone. Story 122. Baby carrots are not young, tender carrots. They are large carrots that are too ugly to be sold whole, so they are cut and sculpted into a smaller, uniform shape. Story 123. Triangles are called triangles because they have 3 angles. I was in my 3rd year of university when I figured that out while procrastinating instead of writing my dissertation. Story 124. I remember a few years ago seeing on Reddit that Arnold from Hey Arnold was not wearing a kilt. It was a really long plaid shirt worn under a sweater. It blew my mind even though you can see the shirt collar. Another time I had to explain to a friend in her mid-20s that the vodka she loved had calories. She thought that because it was clear like water it did not have any. She was not happy. Story 125. This is not about me, but I thought I would share it anyway. No one I have ever told this story to believes it. I will let you decide. I know I would not believe it. When I was a kid, I was at a friend's house. We were about 12 years old. We were in the kitchen while my friend's mother stood at the sink, washing the dishes. She was looking out the kitchen window into the night. Suddenly, she let out a small ooh in a slightly startled voice. My friend asked her what was wrong. She said, "The moon." My friend asked, "What's wrong with it?" She said, "Well, where's the rest of it?" She had apparently reached the age of around 35 or 40 without ever noticing that the moon has phases and is not always full. I have no idea how that could be possible. Story 126. The Chronicles of Narnia, which I read repeatedly while growing up, is a big fat Christian allegory. I was in college when I learned this. Story 127. A friend of mine always uses the expression "it is a dog-eat-dog world," but she is far too wholesome for me to correct her. Story 128. I always assumed green olives naturally had red pieces. I don't eat them, so whatever. I learned well into adulthood that pimentos are added to olives. Story 129. Is it bad that I have learned 3 new things in this thread? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.